Hello and welcome to Tammy. I'm so glad you could join me. Thank you, viewers, for always tuning in to Tammy. As I said, I want you to be ignited, inspired, and revolutionized to tell your story and talk about your community. You know, this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and so I want you to be aware of Breast Cancer Awareness Month. I'm wearing my pink in honor of folks that I have lost and survivors. There are a lot of survivors out there, and so we want to continue to keep that in the forefront, and we want to pray for these families, and we want to pray for the breast cancer survivors and the folks that have lost their lives to breast cancer. Also, this is Domestic Violence Month. So now, you know, I just had a big meeting that I did on yesterday, and it was revealed that a celebrity has undergone domestic violence when she was a younger woman. And for her to be that transparent about what had happened to her was very eye-opening. So what I want you to do is, if you know someone or you yourself is going through a domestic violence situation, please use the national hotline number and call them at 1-800-799-7233. That's 799-7233. It means safe. So if you can't remember the numbers, 799 safe. Give them a call, please, because it's very important that we can hopefully eradicate domestic violence against women and men and children. All right. So listen, you know, I always want to thank you for all of your stories. Listen, you send me those emails. You've been texting me. I get all the comments on Facebook. I continue to want to hear those stories from you. I love when you tell me those stories. And I do want to make another announcement today. As of last week, I was asked again to be the ambassador and selected to be the ambassador for the Nino Summit. Now, for most of you that don't know, Nino Summit is the next gen entrepreneurship, nonstop opportunities. Had to think about it for a minute, folks. But what it's about businesses networking and folks coming together to help you during this pandemic. It's happening November the 18th and the 19th. I'm going to have more information on my Facebook page and also on my LinkedIn page and on my IG page. Listen, if you have any information that you want to share with me, you can always email me at info@TammyMcCottry.com. That's info@TammyMcCottry.com. Look forward to hearing from you. So I've got a great show planned for you. Got an actress from New York, got a history professor, and wow, they're going to talk about some amazing things. And that's what it's all about, folks. It's all about telling your story and what's happening in your community. My first guest is Talia Audrey, but I know her as Talia Robinson, okay? All right, she, you know, that's the stage name. So listen, Talia is an actress. She's a writer. She's a producer. She's a comedic. And I think that's the right way. She's going to correct me if I'm wrong, but she's a comedic actress. And when you see her, she's going to light up this camera. So listen, without further ado, I want to introduce you to Talia. Talia, how are you today?
Hello, Miss Tammy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to have you, my darling. So Talia, let's talk about who Talia is. Tell us a little bit about Talia.
Talia is a Southern girl debutante. Gamazai Omega. How y'all doing?
All right.
Moved to New York City to pursue a dream. Let's give it a shot and see how it turns out. I gave myself 2 years up here in New York, and I have been here for 8 years.
Really?
Yes.
So let's talk about this, Talia. When did you realize that you really wanted to get into the acting business, into this industry? Because it's a hard industry.
It is hard. If you ask my mom, in my baby book, I was voted best storyteller in kindergarten. So I wanted to, you got to hold that close. And whatever you do, you got to remember you already started high. So just keep aiming higher. But no, after college, I did the corporate job. Didn't really like it too much. So I said, you know what I want to do? I want to go ahead and take these improv classes I've always wanted to take. So I started with Theater 99. Hi, Brandy. Hi, Greg. Hi, everybody. And they really taught me how to use my voice and encouraged me to do whatever you want. It's a beautiful family down there at Theater 99. I love it so much. And they encouraged us, if we want to do something bigger, you can go to New York, you can go to Los Angeles, you can go to Chicago. Those are the 3 main hubs for improv. Because it's really cold in Chicago and I'm not an earthquake person, I went to New York City to study with UCB. So I've done the UCB program with the acting or improv and the sketch writing, and kind of found my tribe, because you will find your tribe. Everyone says, oh, you're gonna find your tribe. You'll find them. And performed a lot of stages, and performed solo shows, brought a show back to Piccolo Spoleto. So it's an interesting time now because of everything that's going on, but the work doesn't stop and the creativity does not stop.
That's right, because it's still in your mind. So let's talk about who inspired you, or what inspired you to really just say, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is really what I want to do.
I would say probably, I'm going to say the death of Michael Jackson, because he was, oh man, I mean, with everything, goodness, that just really shook me. I'm like, well, we really don't have that much time. So when you start to see these people in the industry that you look up to and they start passing away, you're like, we're human. We only have a certain amount of time here. And if you're going to do it, go ahead and do it and try it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. You went out there, you tried your best, and then you can move on to something else. So you must try.
That's right. And you can say, you know what, you're not going to look back when you get older and you say, I wish I should have, could have, would have. You know, it's like, hey, let's go ahead and do that. And that's what I've been talking about. That's what we're talking about on Tammy. It's about your story. It's about living your dream. You know, you got to follow these dreams. So Talia, we're talking about Talia, the actress, but Talia is also a producer. You've done your own shows. And so I want you to kind of talk to us about your productions. Let's start with your very first production. And you knew it was like, okay, this is what I want to do.
My very first production that I did by myself was my first one-woman show called Straight Outta Charleston. And it really had no format. You could do whatever you wanted to do. So I said, let's just take all these sketches that I'm writing, audio sketches, whatever the case may be, and slam them into one show. And I partnered up with Theater 99, and they're like, yeah, sure, let's go ahead and let's do it. And what I learned from that experience, so much, because you don't learn until you hit the stage and you actually try something. And what you learn is like, oh, this is not as bad as I thought it would be. Oh, there are some things that I need to correct, but this is fun. And making people laugh is really fun, and it's really addicting, and I really like it a lot. I like to have something people can take away with them. And my favorite thing about performing is someone coming up weeks later and saying, oh, remember that little thing you did in the show? I really enjoyed that. It helped me get through a certain time I was going through. And I'm like, oh, okay, perfect. That's why you're here. You gotta, okay, I got it.
That's right. Now, you know, I said you were comedic. So there's a special way that you told me you are a comedic actress, performer.
It's a way to say it. I say I'm a performer. Up here, I say I'm a comic, but when you say comic, a lot of times the industry will label Black women as, oh, if you say you're a comic, you are a stand-up comedian, and that is not in my realm. I've tried it, doesn't really resonate with me. I speak more through characters and through song. And so when you say comedic actress or just comedian, you just try to any way to get your work out there. But it's just something I wish the industry would change more, and hopefully as we're getting more and more voices heard, you can, like, Black women are not a monolith, and Black women comedians are not a monolith, and there are different ways that we express ourselves.
That's right. You know, you are also a singer, because I've heard you sing. So I'm gonna put you on the spot.
I knew it was coming.
Yes, you know it's coming. I'm gonna put you on the spot. So kind of give us a little something about a little Talia.
Talia is very political. Her minor in college was political science, and it wasn't a major because she had a political disagreement with the head of the political science department. So that's a little bit about me. So if there's something political that I want to say, I will say it through song. So I'll give you a little bit of a parody of And I Am Telling You from Dreamgirls, and it's about voting because it's very important right now. But I am asking you, why aren't you voting? Your vote means more than you know. Ideas for voter obstacles I can show. November 3rd's the date. And less mailing, and you should have already done it, but get your ballot today. We're not voting without you. Don't let the media doubt you. Them polls don't mean a thing. So get ready and get registered. I want you and you and you to say that you're voting. Please say that you're voting.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So listen, that was my next question. So, I mean, that segued into what I wanted to talk to you about. That was great, Talia.
Thank you.
I love it. I love it. So talk to me about how you feel about voting and what's happening now and what's the message, because you're a young woman and I want you to say what you would like to say to these young people now out here about voting.
Well, we have a lot of things. We have the internet. So we're talking with each other now. The thing that resonates the most with me is when I was in high school, I was part of an organization called Operation Understanding. It brings together Jewish and Black teens, and we learn about each other's cultures. And we take trips all around the Southeast. We took a trip to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We walked over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And at the foot of the bridge, there is a museum with all of these pieces of paper from people who walked the bridge and memories. And they just wrote down like little bits of what they remember from it. That is the most powerful thing I have ever seen, and I will not take for granted. I'm gonna get like emotional. All of the sacrifices that have happened so that I'm able to vote. So I get very, very emotional about it with people who do not vote, and they may have different reasons why they don't vote, but you have this opportunity. It's such a privilege to be able to vote. And not only just voting for this major election that's coming up. When people argue a lot in the city about what's going on and they shout out, like here in New York, it's de Blasio. I'm like, yes, but do you know who comptroller is? Do you know who your borough president is? Do you know all these circuit judges that are getting elected? Like, these are things that we need to know. So when you have these historic court cases that keep coming up in reference to people dying at the hands of police or whatever the case may be, and then we just feel like justice goes undeserved and goes undeserved. Where are we? We are part of the process. I just want to empower people. I'm very power to the people. I'm very flower child in that respect, to remember that the government, whoever works there, they work for you. It's not the other way around. And you need to remind them of that.
That's right. You know, Professor Fordham's going to come on and he's going to really talk about that. But I wanted to get your perspective as a young person, because it's so important now. And I've been talking about voting. I wear this pin on all my shows just to say, hey, listen, we've got to get out there and vote. It's not just for the president of the United States, as you said. It's the local. You know, you've got to really hit the ground, and we've got to hit the ground running. So one thing that I want to ask you is, when you hear a young person that says, and we're going to get back to your productions because I want to talk about that. Mm-hmm. But when you hear a young person that says to you, oh man, I'm not voting because, you know, the man up in the White House, person occupied, you know, I don't call his name, person occupied the White House, he ain't no good. So I'm not going to vote. You know what I'm saying? You know, what I'm going to do. So what do you say to that person?
I would say, number one, do you even know if you're registered to vote? Because you can say, I'm not voting. Do you even know, can you vote? Is there something that's missing from your record? Is there something in your record that's preventing you from voting? That's what some people are finding out now with this absentee voting. So there's more to the process about it. You up here in New York City, we complain so much about the MTA. This is a government agency. So there are things, yes, they control, but there are things that we can control. And we need to know who the president of the MTA is. But so when you fuss and grime about daily life is also run by a politician. So you cannot escape it. There is no escaping it.
That's right. That's right. Thank you so much for that, Talia. Coming from you, you know, I want to give your mother a shout out now. We gotta do it. Yes. Okay. I know if she's listening, Sarah, thank you so much. You got a beautiful daughter, Ms. Robinson. Beautiful, Louisa Robinson, beautiful daughter. So let's get back to your productions, because one of the things that you and I talked about, and we've been working together, is this pandemic. You were stuck in New York. New York was shut down. I mean, shut down. It was like a desert. It looked deserted.
Mm-hmm.
How did that feel? And how did you overcome that in deciding on creating the production that you're doing now?
When it first shut down, honestly, I don't know about all New Yorkers. I'm like, great, I need a nap. I need like 2 weeks to just sleep. But as it went on and you've learned the seriousness of it and the loss of life, the thing that sticks with me the most are the sound of the ambulances. It was 24 hours a day because there's no traffic on the street. So that is the only thing that you hear consistently. The ambulance kind of revved up I think we shut down like on March 19th. And just constantly, you just hear it constantly. I don't think the ambulances really stopped until, I'm going to say, maybe late June, and trying to figure out how do we get to the store. Our stores open, trying to figure out how to get basic necessities. I'm not here by myself. I'm here with my brother. He's my roommate. Shout out to my brother, best brother in the world. And we just had to really figure out a plan and say, hey, is it safe to fly? Is it not safe to fly? Is it safe to travel? And these are the things I try to convey to my family and for those who live down south, that I never, ever wanted to get as bad as it was in New York City. And I see everything happening, and I just wish I could convey it to people. Like, it's very, I just want them to take it seriously. And everyone talks about their right to this and right to that. I've seen so much loss of life. I could probably tell you right now how many people have passed away that I know personally. And it's a lot. It's a lot to weigh on you. And so when thinking of trying to do anything funny,
Yeah,
my first thing I was saying, no, no, no. So when the comedians started doing the online shows, I said, no, 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 no. And then eventually I started to write. I like to write in my journal and start to write. And so when I started writing, I'm like, okay, my brain's waking back up. So let's see if we can turn this very serious thing into like a funny lens on it.
Okay, so moving into that, we've got a clip that you brought with you.
Yes.
So we want to show that clip, and we're going to see, and I want you to come back and tell us a little bit about it. Okay?
Joy is a form of resistance.
QT 2020.
Wow. Okay, Talia, tell us about the clip.
Okay, well, the project is called QT 2020 for Quarantine 2020, and it's basically a musical parody about my life in quarantine. I start each clip with the same little joy is a form of resistance because of the incident with Mr. Floyd and all of the protests that happened up here. And this summer has been so much. The pandemic, the COVID pandemic, the racial pandemic, and how do you combine all of those feelings and people just asking you questions about how you feel. This is how I feel. I'm still going to be joyful through it because this is what the ancestors have taught me. No matter what happens, we will continue on. And so that's why I just put the little tidbit in there. But each of it is just me playing in my wigs in the house, different emotions about, do we go outside? Do we not go outside? Noisy neighbors. What are we going to eat? Just normal everyday life.
So what we see, you got the mask on, and like you say, just everyday things. So let's talk about it. What did you do? I mean, you were creating, but what was it like? Because you're living in an apartment, and we've been hearing the stories about having to work in your apartment, having all those things that, like you say, you and your brother are together. He's
Yes.
working, you're trying to work remotely.
Yes.
How does that work, and how were you able to process that?
Well, my brother is a musician, and so he's used to working at home. He's home or he's in the studio. So when I started to work from home, we had to establish some ground rules. So we came up with working hours, and our hours are from such and such a time to such and such a time. every day at 7 p.m. in New York during the height of the pandemic, everyone would clap at 7 p.m. to say thank you to all of the frontline workers. And so we knew when we would hear the hands clapping, we would stop working on whatever respective project. We would come together, we would figure out what we're going to have for dinner, and then we would kind of sit and watch television or whatever the case may be. We started planning trips to Costco. So going to Costco in Carolina is fun. You hop in the car, we're going to Costco, we're loading up, we're going to go. New York City, you take a train to a bus to a line, usually about like an hour wait just to get inside. And it was to the extreme, just to the extreme of any particular theory, or like if you think of like what was the movie, the 80s movie, like The Warriors, like any like movie, disaster movie you think of New York, it was like that, like the creepy, like nobody in the subway, if you have to go to a doctor's appointment, just like it's eerily, like the city was eerily quiet. So it was a time. I thank God for my brother.
Well, you know, right then you reminded me of being in Charleston. You said it was a time. We always say it's a time, you know. So I can only imagine. I mean, being here in my home, you know, and I was telling folks, thank God that I have a home that's open, because otherwise, you know, you're caught up in just being to yourself. But having that creative mind that we both have and that some folks have, we're able to channel that energy and develop a project. And I see that's what you did with QT 2020. Now let's talk about it. How can we see QT 2020?
So QT 2020 is available on Instagram. And for my mom, when you go to Instagram and you click on my name, there are little tabs, and there's a little tab that looks like a TV, and all of the project is listed there. And if you want to listen to the soundtrack, you can do so on my website, firstpage.tylersworld.com, and you can listen to everything. You can download it and learn the songs and sing along if you would like.
Oh, wow. That's exciting. So I'm going to get the QT 2020. Now, you know, you talked about a project earlier, and the project was Spoleto, because I was able to help you with that and come in. Oh, man, that was just fabulous. Talk about how you came up with that idea as well.
So the project for Piccolo Spoleto was called The Real Bubble Lives of Building 104, or Trouble 104. I like to take aspects of my life and just kind of funnel it and deal with it in different ways. So I said, let's write a show. So it's about 4 women who live in an apartment building in New York City, a la Real Housewives of whatever one you watch. We know Atlanta is the best, and how they deal with different issues. So it's very much like confessional booth. And I shout out to my dad, Peter Robinson, who built me a drop screen in 24 hours for Piccolo Spoleto. So, I mean, Piccolo Spoleto was an amazing experience. It's a lot trying to produce a show, just regularly produce a show, but also to produce a show when you are states away.
That's right.
And coming together, just such a wonderful, wonderful experience. I would love to bring something to Piccolo again. It's just a wonderful community of performers.
Well, we're excited to see you. I mean, I was so excited that you said you were able to be on the show, because I know you're such a busy person and a lot that's going on in your life. And I just appreciate you being on the show with me. Want to talk to you about aspiring actresses and producers and writers. What would you say to them as they are preparing and wanting to prepare to be in your shoes?
I would say, I hear a lot of performers say this, and I understand it now being a performer. If you can do anything else, do that. If you also are a good accountant, go do that. Being a performer takes so much of yourself. It's going to challenge you in ways you didn't know. And I had one of my first teachers tell me, nobody is going to care about a project as much as you do. It becomes, I call them my children. Each project is like a child. But if you want to strap in, buckle in, and you want to ride this ride, just remember that the world's accolades don't really matter. What matters is that you're putting out a product that you are proud of, that you'll be proud of in 20 years. Don't let anybody pressure you to make something inside a certain time frame. I tell people, I use the Jill Scott quote, I am an oven, not a microwave. Yeah, just to be patient with yourself, because you are your art and your art is you. And once your art leaves you and you put it out in the world, it will become something different. It may become something you didn't intend it to be, but you must release it, and then something else will come.
Wow. So, got a question. Did anybody on your journey tell you that it's not good to be a starving artist, because that you would be a starving artist going out into this industry? Did you hear that?
You have a lot of
Naysayers.
questions. They won't say naysayers so much as people are very polite, but you have questions in terms of how are you going to support yourself? How are things? Those type of questions that are kind of read in between the line questions, and you just let them know, hey, all is well. I'm good. Everything's good to go. I don't know. It's like that crab in the barrel mentality. And if you see someone, just encourage them, because you just don't know what else they're going through. So they may be asking you this in reference to, they may be struggling through something. So I don't take it so personally. Being in New York City for 8 years, you kind of develop a thick skin, and you just go like, bless their heart. I wish them well on their journey, and hopefully our paths will cross and they have a different attitude about life.
Yeah. And, some of those I can see having that experience with living in New York. You don't have that, what do we want to say, that Southern young lady. Like you said, you've developed that tough skin. And in order to do that, you've been doing what you want to do. And so what would you say to folks? Live your dreams. What would you say?
Plan. Make a plan. Save your money. Double the money that you think you're going to need. You'll need more. Just develop a plan. I'm a very cycles person. So I have a plan for every 7 years. I start a new plan and say, these are the things that I want to accomplish. And I accomplish them. May not be the way that I intended to, but you need to step out with intention, and you'll find your way. Like I said earlier, if you're looking, you will find your tribe and you will find your way, but just don't give up hope.
Don't give up hope. Okay. Last thing I want to find out from Talia.
Yes, ma'am.
Always ask my guests. Okay.
Okay.
Making me feel old now. Yes, ma'am. Anyway, what are the 3 words that you would describe Talia?
Oh, 3 words. Let's see. Nosy, energetic, and loving.
Noisy.
Oh, nosy.
Nosy.
Yes, I want to know.
Oh, you want to know. Energetic and loving?
Loving.
Wow. The one thing that I got out of this, and like I said, I love to always have takeaways. And so the takeaway that I got from this was that you planned. And for you to be a young woman who has really just blossomed and I mean, just done so well in your profession, and I'm so proud of you, to hear you say that is commendable, because a lot of young people, and I'm not saying you're that young, what I'm saying is you're in the younger generation.
I hear you.
Yeah. All right. You're not 15, 16,
no.
17.
No.
You're in that younger generation. And to hear you say that you plan, you save your money, you doubled your money, you really went after this with intention, says a lot about you. And I'm just so proud to know you, and I thank God for you. And I wish you the best. I mean, you're phenomenal, and I wish you all that God has in store for you, because you deserve it. You're doing such a wonderful job, and I look forward to more productions. Hopefully you'll put me in one of them, okay?
I will write a part for you, I promise.
All right. That I like. Talia, listen, one thing that you'd like to say to the viewers before you leave, just a takeaway.
Follow your dreams. Plan to follow your dreams. If you're in New York City, you have until October 9th to register to vote. So please register to vote. And for more information on projects and things that I have coming up, you can go to taliasworld.com.
Talia, this has been wonderful. I have enjoyed talking with you, and I look to talk with you further. So you'll come back on the show when you have your other production, because I know you're working on something big that you really can't talk about, but I'm looking forward to hearing about it and talking with you about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Talia. God bless you now. Take care.
Likewise.
Thanks, Mom. And brother dear. All right, listen, we heard from Talia Audrey, better known to me as Talia Robinson. And she is a Charlestonian. We forgot to mention that. I know you might have gotten that out of that, but she is a Charlestonian. And just to see this young person doing the things that she's doing, and she shared a lot with us. As I said, she said, follow your dreams and register to vote, okay? So we've got to do that. Talking about voting, talking about history, I have none other than Professor Damon Fordham. Now, I've known Damon, I'm gonna call him Damon. Damon and I go way back, but that's a friend. And I'm gonna tell you what, this man knows everything. I just don't know how he does it, where it comes from, but he's phenomenal. He's a professor. He's at the Citadel. He's at the other college, and he's going to tell us all about it. And I know that he has a lot to share with us. But I want to introduce you to none other than Professor Damon L. Fordham.
Good to be here, as always.
Hey, Damon, thank you. You were in the green room, so we appreciate you for sitting there waiting. Hope you enjoyed the show thus far.
As a matter of fact, I believe I was one of the teachers of Talia back in the early 2000s with Operation Understanding, because when I was on your show about 20 years ago, I talked about that, and I believe I was one of the people that accompanied her to Alabama at that time.
Wow.
Does this ring a bell?
I was like, look at that circle of life, the circle of life.
Do you remember that, by the way? Do you remember me from that?
I don't particularly. I remember the experiences.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, but it is such a wonderful organization. It was the most enlightening thing to learn about it. And then guess what? We're going out. We're going outside. Yes, we're going outside.
Very good.
Well, listen, thank you for that. Thank you, Talia. Listen, professors, look at that, the circle of life. You just see how things just come right on back around.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So now I asked Talia, I ask all my guests, tell us who you are. Who is Damon?
Okay. Let's see. Born in Spartanburg, South Carolina, put up for adoption as an infant, was raised by a very decent family, Pearl and Abraham Fordham in Mount Pleasant. He taught at Lang High School, and my mother was a nurse at what was then the medical college. Loved to read, loved to listen to the old folks tell stories. So I eventually got into the history field. So today I write about history. I do a YouTube series called The American Storyteller. I've written 3 books, did a radio show, a newspaper column, as well as a lot on social media, because I think it's too important that so many people, when they know these things, they keep it within the ivory tower of academia. But the average everyday Joe and Jane need to hear this type of thing. So my mission is to bring this information in an interesting and informative way to the average Jane and the average Joe to make a better present and plan better for the future.
Oh, Damon, right now, I'm going to ask you to move a little closer to your computer.
Okay, how's that?
That's great. You started freezing a little bit. And so, folks, this is what we call in television, technical difficulties. So now we can hear you much better. And so, so thank you for sharing that. You know, you said you're adopted. You know, I'm adopted from birth as well. And we've had beautiful parents, had a wonderful upbringing. And I want to ask you this: who inspired you, or what inspired you to really get into history? Because you love to tell stories.
Listening to my parents tell a lot of stories about their growing up in the Great Depression, World War II, and the segregation days that I just basically missed by hair, the latter part, and all these other things, I found the stories of the elders so much more interesting than conversing with other children. So that's why a lot of people say that I'm an old soul. And then when I would go to school, I would find some of the very things that my parents would talk about, as well as other elders in the history books. And so I found all this fascinating, but it wasn't until I went to the University of South Carolina, and there was a man named Dean Willie Harford who taught African American history, that he made me realize that I could make a living off of this. And the irony of that is that my dad died in February 14th, 1984, and I met Dean Harford in the fall of 1984. And his leading me to this path is kind of almost like he was put there to pick up where my dad left off. So that worked out quite well, I have to say. And so I'm trying to inspire young people in the same way that he inspired me.
Okay. So, so while you're getting situated, let's talk about history, because, you know, Talia brought up a good point. She talked about the fact that she is really into wanting people to know about voting. And, you know, when I first talked to you about this, I wanted you to come on because people don't understand their constitutional rights. They don't understand what it's like about voting, what they need to do, how they need to do it, and that we have this privilege that people fought for us, the right for us to vote. So I want you to kind of share a little bit of history about voting.
Okay, before I get into the history part, I have to tie that in with the present. Now,
Okay.
Earlier, Talia talked about young people who say that they don't want to vote and so forth. And I found that when people say that they're not going to vote, I found that when people say that they're not going to vote, it's usually because they haven't studied voting and they don't really understand the process. And so they're using that sort of bravado to sort of shrug off the fact that they really don't know or understand the process. And it's so important that you do. You know, you should never be too ashamed to admit when you don't know something, because that's when someone can teach you something, see? And if they want to be arrogant about it, that's on them and not you. Because there was a time when the person who knows something didn't know themselves. And you have to remind them of that if they get arrogant with you, okay? So I have to say that, number one. Now, getting back to your question. We, African Americans, got the right to vote 5 years after the end of slavery with the 15th Amendment, you see, which basically said that you could not refuse to register a person due to race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But what happened was that you had a black governor in Louisiana, Pinckney Benton Stewart Pinchback, who served in 1873, the guy who founded Southern University. You had 2 black lieutenant governors in South Carolina, Alonzo Jacob Ransier and Richard Howell Gleaves. Both of them served till about 1877. You had a temporarily integrated University of South Carolina. Robert Smalls, the black congressman who was responsible for inaugurating the school system of South Carolina, and all of this great forgotten history that lies buried in old newspapers and in archives. But what happened was the reactionaries, people who were against that, led by people like Benjamin Tillman here in South Carolina, overthrew those type of governments, and thus you had the Klan type groups taking over, which led to the segregation laws, which barred us from voting for many years until we started making cracks with that in the 1940s. And then in 1965, you had the Voting Rights Act. Now, without the vote for all of those years, that caused a lot of people to eventually lose interest in the process. So we have to work on getting them back up to that, because one thing you have to notice is this: politicians care about basically getting votes and staying in power. And in order to do that, you take the people who have regular trash pickups in their communities, nice sidewalks, good schools, etc., and so forth, all the nice public services. Those are done because the people who run those communities know that if they do not provide service to their communities, they will be voted out and unemployed by the public, as they should be. That's a lesson that we haven't taught very well to the masses of our people. Because instead they're just told by the people who expect to vote for such and such a person election after election, and the people don't know to demand results of that. It's not just voting itself. You have to make these people work for you, because that's what they are there for. And if they don't do that, it's your duty as your employer to fire them if they don't. So we have to increase that kind of understanding among our people, that that's the way you get things done in your community.
You know, one of the things when David was on, David Mack, my big brother, South Carolina Representative David Mack, one of the things that David said that struck me was he tells people there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words. When you go into talk with a senator, you go in and you talk with one of the representatives or even the governor, he says, you tell them, I live in your precinct or in your district. And that's what I hear you saying, that we don't have the awareness for our people to understand that you've got all these rights. Use your voice. I mean, and Talia was saying, use your voice because we have that voice. Talk about moving into the present. What do people need to do at this point so that we can make sure that we have equality, which we're not probably going to, but so that the voting process can happen the way it needs to. You know what I'm saying? What do we need to do? What do we need to do, Damon?
Well, here in South Carolina, the deadline has already passed to register to vote. But we need to create, now you just mentioned Representative David Mack. And one of the great things that he did back in the 80s and the 90s and such was he had the open rap show on the dearly departed radio station WPAL to educate the public on these things. And that's very important because Martin Luther King made a speech in Atlanta to a black disc jockey convention in August of 1967, where he told the disc jockeys and the black radio announcers they had a major responsibility to the masses of people because a lot of them weren't reading the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or the various news magazines and such. And a lot of them didn't watch the news, but they listened to the radio. So they use that format to educate the people on the politics and all the things that they needed to know about education and all that while providing them with the musical entertainment. So today we have to do the same thing with social media. People are on social media. So those of us who know about things like science and education and history and politics and all that, we have the duty to go to where the people are to bring the message to them in a manner in which they can understand in order for us to move forward.
You know, Damon, what you're talking about is what we say, that grassroots grassroots politics. Have we really lost grassroots politics, or are we getting back to it with our young people? What do you think?
Well, I can tell you that in talking with the young people aren't really taking the time to get with them on these things. I spoke to a number of young people on 2 occasions recently in North Charleston. A lot of them did not know things that, for example, that if a person has been incarcerated, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't vote. It means that if they had a misdemeanor, that does not affect their voting rights. But if they had a felony, they just had to be out of the system in order to vote. And they told me they didn't know that because all they heard was the misinformation from the streets that if you had been to jail, that somehow meant that you couldn't vote. And that's simply not true. But you see, what happens is a lot of these young people are not growing up in homes where these things are taught or discussed. And this is why we have such a responsibility to get to them with this information, because if nobody else gives it to them, they're going to get it in all the wrong places. Because see, one of the things about social media is not knowing something does not stop a person from getting on social media and making a fool of themselves by giving bad information.
That's right.
And unfortunately, as long as you keep your mouth open, somebody's going to listen. But if you keep your mouth quiet, no one will. So that's why if you know about these things and how they work, you have a responsibility to open your mouth where people can hear you and learn better and do better.
That's right. You know, Professor Damon, I tell you what, you need your own show. We got to talk about this, because the way you rocking and rolling right now, man, I'm like, how do you remember all of these places, dates, and names? How does that happen? Is that just innate? What's the way that what's your method?
Very simple. Why do Michael Jordan and LeBron James and Kobe and all of them play basketball as well as they do? Two things. They love what they do and they practice. I was a horrible athlete as a child. I was very uncoordinated. To this day, if you want to tune me out, just start talking about sports. I'm just not a sports guy, period. But I found early that I was inclined toward these type of things in which we're discussing. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I just sort of stuck with it and kept with it. But as I got older, I came to see that since there were so many people that didn't know these things, that it was up to people such as myself to, since I grew up around a lot of people who didn't know these things, that I could communicate with people who didn't know these things and bring it out to them in a manner in which they could understand.
Okay, well, listen, the Damon Fordham show is on the way, y'all. I'm gonna make sure of that because
Well,
you do a lot of speaking. You do
right.
you do a lot of speaking. You're a
Mhm.
motivator. You've
Mhm.
written some books. Let's talk about
Mhm.
that. Talk about the books that you've written.
Very good. My first book was called True Stories of Black South Carolina. And what that was, it was a compilation of lesser known stories about African Americans in South Carolina. And among the ones in that book was the fact that, you had the movie A Time to Kill, which is where a black man killed a man who had molested his daughter. We had a
Mm-hmm.
case like that in South Carolina back in 1888 up in central South Carolina, which is Lindsey Graham's hometown. A black man named Sherman Cato actually organized a lynch mob to lynch the white man who had killed his daughter and lived to tell about it. That story is in there. There was a race riot in Charleston on May the 10th, 1919, where the African Americans of Charleston stood up to these sailors who had lynched a couple of African Americans and so forth. And they got so rough that the mayor had to call not the National Guard, but the U.S. Marines to put
Really?
down the riot. And that was one of the few cases in American history where the lynchers not only went to trial, but were actually locked up. And and many stories like that. What I like to do is challenge the narrative that most people tend to believe,
Mm-hmm.
and to tell stories that go to show that the type of narratives that you've been taught all your lives to believe, real life just doesn't always work like that. Sometimes real life comes in unexpected surprises and these buried stories that were buried in old newspapers and archives. And see, I love digging for things like that. And I love bringing them out to the people because they find it interesting. Because see, in other words, I like to tell the stories that most people have never heard before.
That's right. And that's why I love it. Because even on Facebook, when when you post some of these stories, I mean, I'm a Charlestonian as well, and lived in South Carolina. Some of the things I hadn't heard about, and I was like, "Wow, Damon, that's great." Or I know about it. And I said, "Damon, I knew about that one." And so, having you do that. Now, you wrote the book Black South Carolinians: The Truth About Black South Carolinians, right? And then the other book that you wrote, or you're writing another book, I know. Can you talk about that?
Okay, well, let me talk about the two in between before I get to that. Okay,
Okay,
let's do
all
this in
right.
chronological order. All right.
Okay.
Okay, so then after that, I did one called Voices of Black South Carolina that told the inspiring stories largely of the African Americans in Reconstruction. And a lot of that history was wiped clean after people like Benjamin Tillman, who was the architect of segregation in South Carolina. When people like that took office and you had groups like the United Daughters of the Confederacy take care of the history books, a lot of that history was erased. But like I said, I love digging in old libraries and in archival rooms and all of that. And I brought a lot of this stuff out to the general public of the great heroic things that these African American legislators did during that brief period that we had the vote in the 1870s. The idea of we had black lieutenant governors and black governors and men like Robert Smalls creating the school system and so forth. And right here in Charleston, as a matter of fact, there was a streetcar boycott in 1867 where they actually integrated the streetcars temporarily until segregation became the law again. Things like that that are so interesting and inspiring. And it's not about bringing up these stories to cause hatred within people. It's to let them know that these interesting things happened, and if these people overcame these things, so can you. Then I did
That's
a book
right.
called Mr. Potts and Me that was loosely, as a matter of fact, I first talked about, your show was the very first place where I talked
Yeah.
about that back
Yeah.
in 2010, which was basically a slightly not fictionalized version of my childhood about this lonely bookworm of a kid that everybody thought was weird and strange. And this old man tells him all these fascinating stories that gets him through life. That was based on a combination of my father and a man who partially raised my mother named Walter Snipe, who was well known in Mount Pleasant till he died in 1973 when I was 8 years old. So I fused these into the type of gentleman who was filled with both humor and wisdom. And it was individuals like that that got us through a lot of tough times before we had Black politicians reemerge later on in the 1970s. So I wanted to put that book out there because it gave a lot of advice to a lot of young children that did not have the good fortune to have those type of wise elders in their lives. Now, for what I'm working on at the moment. I'm working on a book that I'm tentatively calling Call Us Aliens. Because see, when Benjamin Tillman took away the rights of African Americans in South Carolina in 1895 and made segregation the law of the state, 6 Black Low Country men, including the great Robert Smalls, Thomas Miller of Charleston, who in fact, your Aunt Cynthia went to his funeral when she was a little girl.
That's right.
William J. Whipper, who's the great granduncle of Seth Whipper, Robert Anderson of Georgetown, and James Wigg and Isaiah Reed and so forth. All of these people who fought against the segregation laws at the time. That story was so inspiring to me that I'm putting that in the book at the moment.
Wow. Now, you know what? I can't wait to see that. Now, that's Call Us Aliens. So I'm going to have you come back on. You know, like I told Talia, you're going to come back on for her production. You're going to come back on and talk about to Call Us Aliens. You know, Damon, one of the questions, and we don't have a lot of time, but, you know, you said something very important. You said you like to dig. So where do you find these? Where do you find these stories? I mean, is it all over South Carolina? Have you traveled all over South Carolina to find this? Did you have to go to Washington, D.C., to the Smithsonian? What did you do to get this information?
2 things. I listen to old people, and then I go to the reference rooms of libraries where very few people tend to go to dig up a lot of historical stuff, because I was taught how to use archives as a history major at University of South Carolina. And I use them. And I just put it out there in a way that people can digest it.
Wow. Well, Professor Damon Fordham, I thank you. Love you, my brother. You are just, you're the real deal. You are the real deal. So let's do this. How can people get in touch with you, Damon? What do they need to do?
Okay, my email address is Damon Fordham, as in one word, DAMONFORDHAM, 1964, year I was born, at gmail.com. Try to keep it simple, you know?
Yeah, you're telling your age now, Damon. You're telling your age.
I claim my years.
Say it is what it is, right?
That's
right. It is what it is. Well, listen, my brother, I want to thank you. So before I let you go, I asked Talia question. So I want to ask you the same thing. What are the 3 words that describe Damon?
Oh, wow. What are the 3 words that describe me? One thing is that I'm resilient. I can definitely say that I'm very resilient. I'm interesting. I don't think I bore people. And I would say that I'm also contented in that I found my niche in life and what I like to do. But one thing I would like to do is eventually just basically go throughout the country on the lecture circuit, because I have a whole lot of things to talk about other than South Carolina too, that I think would be beneficial for the rest of the country. So I haven't spoken outside of South Carolina since I was at the University of Berkeley in California in 2013. So if you're out there in the rest of the country, you see my email, call me up sometime, all right?
That's right. Listen, I'm going to help you with that. We're going to make sure that you get out there in the circuit, because you said you like to talk a lot and you have other things to talk about than South Carolina. And so I want to thank you again for being on the show.
Excuse me. One thing very quickly. Yes, I also have a YouTube channel called The American Storyteller, where you can see a lot of videos of the type of things with the stories that I often write about. So you can access that, The American Storyteller on YouTube. Easy to remember. Okay,
The American Storyteller on YouTube. I'm gonna make sure I let people know about that. Damon, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. I mean, man, I learned so much just today. And I want you to, people to get out there and vote. That's one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that you came on. But you gave us some history and some things to really think about. And the struggle.
And I did it yesterday.
Hello, come on, David. Come on.
I practice what I preach.
Yes, sir. And my friend, thank you again for being on the show. Talk with you later, Damon. Okay, take care, Damon. All right. Listen, folks, I hope you enjoyed this show. I'm telling you, this show was packed with a beautiful actress. We had the Talia Audrey. And then, of course, we had Professor Damon Fordham. Now, if you didn't learn anything from the both of them, something's wrong. If you didn't enjoy this like I did, then something's wrong. That's what I'm telling you. Tammy, your story, your community, right here every Thursday night at 7:00 p.m. Remember, you can get in touch with Talia by going to This Is Talia's World, and we'll show that as well. And you can get in touch with her, taliasworld.com. All right. And she will be able to get in touch with you. You can get in touch with Damon and Damon Fordham 1964 at gmail.com. I want to thank my guests so much for being on the show. I want to thank you for being here. Now, remember what I always tell you. Please get out and vote. Just don't vote for the president. Vote for them, for the local. And I'm going to say it like they say in Charleston, for them other people. Vote for them. Okay? It's because it starts from the bottom and goes to the top. So we want to make sure that we are in a position where we are not going to have what we've had for the last 4 years. That's all I can say to you. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but I'm telling you we cannot go through what we have gone through for the last 4 years. So please make sure that you get out and vote. Next week, guests are going to be on. Some fantastic guests. They are authors. I have Carolyn Blake. She's an author. I have Jay and Bridget DeWeese, authors. Let me tell you, but what they don't know is they both have some of the same stories, and the stories are going to be entwined as we begin to unpack everything that's going to happen next week. And then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to have a celebrity chef on, and we're going to be doing some cooking. You might have heard of him. It's about shrimp and grits. So I want you to pay attention to what's happening and coming up in the next couple of weeks. Listen, as always, I want to tell you, thank you. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sending me those texts and emails and for supporting this show. I love you all, and I pray God speed and that you do all the things that you want to do. Follow your dreams, and like I said, if there's something that you can do, be a blessing to someone today and every day. All right. Remember that. Love you much. Until the next time, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.